Now that I have the front fender painted, I've been debating on whether or not to put it on and color sand it and buff it, or do it while it's still on the bench. It just makes the most sense to go ahead and install it. I'm probably going to end up chipping up the edges of the door and the edge of the fender. It's difficult to do this all by myself. The inner fender well for this car is really difficult to get in and out. You have to kind of get the inner fender well in, and then you got to attach it to the fender and then finish putting it in. So it's inevitable I'm going to chip it up. So I might as well just leave it as it is right now, get it all back together, and then I can do any touch-ups that I might need to do, and then I can color sand and buff the whole car, because the whole car needs to be done. And the weather is starting to look really good now. It's springtime, so I'll be able to pull it out in the driveway, wet sand the whole thing, make a mess of the driveway, hose it off, roll it back in the garage and buff it. So we're getting really close. I'm excited to get this fender back on. One thing I was just noticing, just as I went to put the fender on, I remembered this blower motor was screaming, making a lot of noise. So it makes sense to go ahead and replace it while this is off. I grabbed a universal blower motor for this. Typically for a car like this, I would buy General Motors, either some NOS parts, especially if it's something that's seen. But this isn't seen. Nobody will even know it's there. You can't see it. It's all hidden inside of the fender here. So a low cost, good quality aftermarket part will work just fine for this heater. So pretty simple. It's just got a handful of screws that go around the edge and one wire. I was going to hook the battery up, but I don't have a battery. So I will test this with my battery charger just to make sure it works. Since this is so well hidden in the fender, I just realized the nightmare would have been if I got everything all hooked up and turned this on and it didn't work. So just to make sure. It works. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I know there's some steps to it all, but I'm just going to have to kind of make my way through how I remember. The way I remember it, and have to start in the top and work your way around. And you also have to have the trim on there at the same time. So I'll start by getting a couple bolts lined up. So at this point I've got everything just loosely tied in here on the fender well lip, and there's two bolts here on the back that's inside the fender well. So now I'm going to try to manipulate this into place. So far everything's sliding into place. You've got to really watch this gap. It's got to go underneath this trim. You bugger this trim up pretty good if you're not careful. Watching the hinge go under. I've got spacers for all of these areas that are just sitting here, so I'm going to have to manipulate this in and get the spacers in and just really keep an eye on all the gaps. This bolt here has an obvious sign of where it was. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten that one down, and then everything else should start to flow around it. Okay, that end is locked down. So So far, so good. Don't like this gap. It's moving all over the place. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to get the fender to settle down and tighten up these two, and then I can tighten up the bottom and it'll bring this out. Well, finally, my critical gaps are all lined up. I mean, they're not the best gaps, but they weren't the best gaps 30 years ago when this was repainted. My main thing is I wanted this line of sight to line up, because that would be real obvious if that was stepped off. And I needed to make sure that it didn't hit when you open the door. And you can see that is super, super close. Really tight gap right there in the movement. And if I brought this fender out much more, then it just really messes up all the alignment. Looks good. Paint matches. Now I just need to finish attaching all that front end. Put the hinge back on. And I've got the bolt holes lined up as close as I can to the original holes. Now this gap on this side is way too close, and this gap is too big. So I'm going to have to move this corner back a little bit. I need to still go back just a little bit more. I don't like the way this is pulling in right here. I need to put another shim under here and lift this up. It tied all this together, but it's pulling the fender down, and it's leaving the hood a high spot right through here, so I've got to lift that up. In a regular Camaro, all you got here is a headlight bucket. But in a convertible, you've got the so-called cocktail shakers. These are the balancing shakers I mentioned in an earlier video. These are about 30 pounds, and from what I read, there's a big steel ball in here, and there's a spring on both sides, and then it's filled with liquid of some sort, probably like a hydraulic fluid. And that goes right back in that corner. And in addition to that, since it's a rally sport, we have the vacuum canister that pulls that headlight door shut. You can see the headlight door there. And the reason why the fenders are different for the rally sport is these two mounting points. That's what the headlight mounts to. And then one of the things you can tell a true rally sport is this hole is in the fender liner, in that inner fender. And there are a few other holes that are in that inner, as well as, like I say, the mounting points for the headlight on the original Rally Sport fender. So there's a whole lot of pieces that are going on in here. There's extra wires, there's extra hoses. We've got hoses for the vacuum lines. I've got hoses for the headlight washers. And then there are some springs that go down in here and some other attachments, some pivot points. So yeah, there's a lot that goes on. It's tough to get it all in here. And then just on the inside of there is the battery tray and how that all mounts. It's hard for me to really film how all this goes back together because it's so difficult to get in there with both hands and parts and wrenches. So I'll give you a little bit of a shot of before where everything mounts, and then I'll give you a couple of shots as I start getting everything loaded in here. There's the cocktail shaker in place. It sits right behind the headlight. So the hole then here, the control arms for the hidden headlights drop down here and hook up to that vacuum canister. And then the headlight mounts here and here. And everything has to be adjusted. So you have to put everything in, put the grill in, make some adjustments, take the grill out. It's one of those trial and error things to get everything to line up and fit correctly and open and close smoothly. Back in the day, the government went crazy over these bumpers. Good old Ralph Nader. This was one of them that really got him going about automobile safety and bumper safety. This bracket literally just bolts onto the fender. There's no behind it. It's just sheet metal and 2 bolts. These flimsy little bumpers, little brackets, mount right to another bracket that mounts to the frame. So, and it's thin, very lightweight. There's no substance to these bumpers at all. It wasn't about safety. It was purely about looks. So it's pretty easy to mount too. Just put on these brackets, bolt to the fender, and then these just slide back in along the rails. Once you got these ends bolted up, there's not a whole lot of play. There's not a lot of adjustment. If it's a little bit to one side, it's there. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. You can oval these holes out a little bit. And I might do that because it hugged this edge and had a gap on that edge. So I think I'll oval it out just a little bit and bump it over if I can. And that's about all I can do. And then just bolt it down. Adjust this up. I'll do these bolts. There's 4 bolts on each side. So I'll have to climb under the car and attach those. And then these little extensions goes to the front air split, the front air dam goes underneath the bumper. He ripped it off on a curb or something. And he wants me to put on the new one, so I'll do that. There's some screws that go underneath here that hold it on, and then it's got a bolt on each corner that holds the corners up. So this is the front spoiler that General Motors did for these. I believe it was a Z28 item. Maybe you could get it on a SS version. Didn't come on this car originally, but it was added because it's cool. It mounts to the license plate bracket. It has 2 screws that mount to this balance panel, and then it has this bracket that mounts out here to the corner. Of course, I got a rusty bolt. Only rusty bolt I think I've had on this whole car. Looks good under there.